You may have considered whether or not children and adults can actually forge emotional and intellectual connections with animals during their day out at a zoo, especially considering the costs that education departments at zoos can rack up. Zoos, as a recreational, family-oriented, entertainment-based concept on the whole, despite their connections to conservation, may be limited in their ability to educate as many people due to financial constraints. Is considering alternative teaching methods even a viable message for zoos in so-called developing countries? Let me know your initial thoughts in the comments below. Besides, can children really gain that much out of going to a zoo besides liking animals a bit more than they had previously? Let's consider one alternative teaching method. There exists a strategy in education that is based on increasing the awareness and appreciation of a learner's perception or relationship with a certain resource through forging some kind of emotional connection, interpretation. This can be applied to zoos specifically. Interpretation considers itself patriotic or global work, depending on the circumstances, the feelings of community that go into a local group's valued resources or locations are often associated with the items or concepts themselves. For example, consider what would it mean to the Greeks if the Acropolis was turned into condominiums, or if the Louvre became a shopping mall, or perhaps the Everglades were drained and paved. The goal of interpretation is to allow the patrons of such resources to learn to recognize the inherent value from the emotions associated with it, i.e., monuments associated with national pride, endangered animals associated with a sense of wonder. Take the following example. A textbook cannot necessarily teach one wonder or pride. Interpretation's aim is to educate, like a textbook, and offer a visitor, say at a zoo, a reason to experience such emotions on their own, independent of the interpreter, creating a direct link or a bridge for these feelings to coalesce between the patron and the object or location itself. The use of interpretation to reduce visitor impacts in a zoo or park are the most commonly cited conservation applications. Concepts where immediate effect are also important in changing the viewpoint of students, audiences, and communities. Short-term educational solutions like encouraging people from using sunscreen with hazardous chemicals in it that pass on to coral reef polyps can be the difference between places of natural value like the famous Great Barrier Reef existing for the grandchildren of those watching this video to seeing it in person someday. That's the difference between conventional teaching and theatrical, historical, or value-based teaching. If an interpreter at a zoo can educate students to prevent them from doing something, or perhaps encourage a certain type of thinking in ways where the student realizes their direct connection to that resource, i.e. in the previous case, the example is involving hypothetical grandchildren, while simply stating 2 generations sounds distant, irrelevant, not immediate, and thus not related to the student or the viewers of this video in particular. Inaction is not the only short-term benefit from interpretation, but includes promotion of values that arise from emotions that interpreters can showcase, try to evoke, but ultimately are revealed by the students, the patrons, or the children themselves. If the goal of all interpretive services is to increase each visitor's enjoyment and understanding of the zoo or a park, and to allow visitors to care about the park or the zoos on their own terms, then individual needs must be met for each visitor's emotional needs. For instance, take a stingray and shark touch pool exhibit at a zoo. An interpreter can teach an audience about marine life, dictate shark facts, even while presenting the friendliest of attitudes, but it is not until the child actually experiences a real-life moment with an animal that these values might not register. They might not register at all. They may become moved to tears at the wonder of brushing their hands up against a meter-wide stingray. Younger children may cry in fear and dissociate wild animals with the sensation that they are unsafe. Either way, interpreters have a unique perspective coming from values of entertainment and education, where they have an opportunity to make an emotion arise through a unique set of emotional manipulation skills that can drive a teaching lesson home. Overstimulation is also a concern, just like a teacher would in a classroom of secondary school teenagers. For many, without these educators, the experience would be akin to a short thrill ride at an amusement park. Purchase ticket, receive entertainment, associate animals, in particular with cages, distance. In a technology-saturated world, so few children and adults have ever experienced aquatic life beyond the screen, or certainly not in ways that could be invasive. They could be hurt, bitten, not enjoy the experience. After all, not all animals are soft and gentle. It is the short-term feeling of contentment and fun that a very young child has after a day at the local nature institute, playing with ladybugs in a jar and learning about garden insects in what British conservation educators call mini beasts, or the feeling of accomplishment that a teenager experiences after months of weekends spent doing a voluntary beach litter cleanup program, knowing that they can put this experience on their university application. Whatever the incentive, educational programs have been proven to work at changing mindsets in both the short and long term on environmental issues. And interpretation could be an especially effective way of achieving this on a global scale, especially using the resources available from the AZA, BIAZA, and EAZA. And that's just across zoos. Zoos have the ability to critically evaluate developing trends and issues in animal science at both national and international levels, but also especially on the local level. Even with developed and developing nations, considering the shared resources options mentioned in this survey and in the video. Thank you for taking the time to consider my questions and ideas about alternative education methods in zoos, and I ask you to consider again whether or not you think children and adults both can gain emotional and intellectual connections with animals after a day out at the zoo.